My name is Sergeant Nancy Watts, 29 years old, and just 2 weeks before my wedding, my hero deserted me. My father, a retired colonel, withdrew his promise to walk me down the aisle to attend a party my sister, Serafina, intentionally scheduled for the same day. But what they didn't expect was the soldier who bravely stepped up to take his place, and the look on my father's face when he was confronted with that reality is a moment that will be seared into my memory forever. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're listening from in the comments below. And if you've ever felt betrayed by the one person you trusted most, hit that like button and subscribe so you can follow me on this journey to reclaim my honor. The common room at Fort Bragg always had the same familiar scent, a mix of stale coffee, industrial floor cleaner, and the faint metallic tang of dedication. For most, it was just the smell of work, but for me, it was the smell of stability. It was a comfortable smell. I was sitting on one of the worn-out vinyl couches, the late afternoon sun slanting through the blinds in dusty stripes, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't known was possible. Outside, I could hear the rhythmic chants of a platoon on a run, their boots hitting the pavement in perfect unison. Inside, it was quiet. On the tablet resting on my knees, I was scrolling through pictures of wedding bouquets, peonies and white roses, simple and elegant. A part of me, the part molded by years of service, found the decision-making process frivolous, but another softer part was quietly thrilled. For the first time, I was planning a future that didn't revolve around a deployment schedule or a training exercise. I was building a life with a good man. I was building a home. My phone buzzed on the cushion next to me. It was a text from Caleb. Just a ridiculous meme of a squirrel in a tiny army helmet with the caption, "Reporting for husband duty. Still have no idea what I'm doing." I laughed out loud, a genuine happy sound that echoed slightly in the quiet room. The air felt light. Everything felt possible. And then, my phone rang. The screen lit up with a familiar name. Dad. A reflexive warmth spread through my chest. For a moment, I was just a daughter, excited to talk to her father. A smile spread across my face as I answered. "Dad, I was just thinking you were about to call and complain about the color of the ties." But the voice that came back wasn't my father's, not the one I knew. The other end of the line was filled with a dead, heavy silence, an active silence that sucked the warmth right out of the room. Then, his voice, flat and devoid of any affection, cut through the quiet. "Nancy, I need to speak with you. It's important. Regarding June 15th, there's been a change of plans." My heart clenched, a sudden, painful squeeze in my chest. It wasn't just the words, it was the delivery. He didn't call me honey or his usual nickname, my warrior. He called me Nancy, the same way he'd address a private who'd stepped out of line. He was using his colonel's voice on me. The lightness I'd felt just seconds before evaporated, replaced by a cold, familiar dread. I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white. I tried to keep my voice steady, but a tremor ran through it. "A change of plans, sir. That's my wedding day." His response was as crisp and detached as if he were issuing a combat order from behind a desk. "Serafina has landed a critical event for her career, a major investment opportunity in Charlotte. My presence is essential to show a united family front." The words felt like nonsense, a foreign language I couldn't process. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. A misunderstanding, a terrible joke. A united family front? I could hear my voice rising, the carefully constructed calm of a sergeant cracking under the strain of a daughter's panic. "What about your promise, Dad? You promised you would walk me down the aisle. We talked about it." A heavy, irritated sigh came through the speaker. It was a sound I knew well. The sound that meant my emotions were an inconvenience. "Don't be so dramatic, Nancy. You're a soldier. You, of all people, should understand sacrifice for the greater good." "The greater good?" I whispered the words, my throat suddenly tight and dry. I looked around the empty common room, feeling as if the walls were closing in. "This couldn't be happening," he continued, his tone now laced with a cruel impatience, as if I were a slow recruit, failing to grasp a simple concept. "Serafina's career is a long-term investment for this family's future. It has potential for significant growth. Your wedding, to be blunt, is a personal event. It offers no strategic value. Strategic value. The phrase hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. Strategic value. He had taken the very language of my world, the world of sacrifice and duty I had entered in no small part to earn his respect, and turned it into a weapon against me. All my sacrifices, the sand of Afghanistan in my boots, the missed Christmases, the scars both seen and unseen. In my father's eyes, they held no strategic value. My commitment to a man I loved, the start of my own family, was just a line item on a balance sheet with no return on investment. He wasn't finished. He delivered the killing blow with the casual indifference of a man swatting a fly, a logistical afterthought to tidy up a messy detail. Just ask your fiancé's uncle, Jed. He can do it. He's a good man. The casualness of it was what broke me. It wasn't shouted in anger, it was stated as a simple fact. And just like that, he had declared that his role as my father on the most important day of my life was not just secondary, but completely replaceable. An interchangeable part, a problem solved. I didn't say another word. There was nothing left to say. The man I had idolized my entire life, the hero whose boots I had tried so desperately to fill, had just told me, in no uncertain terms, that I wasn't worth his time. I quietly ended the call, my hand feeling strangely heavy as I lowered the phone to my lap. A fellow sergeant, a guy named Miller, was walking past on his way to the vending machine. He clapped me on the shoulder. "Hey, Sarge, you seeing ghosts or something? You're a million miles away." Yes, I thought. The ghost of the man I thought my father was. But I couldn't form a response. I couldn't move. My eyes were fixed on the far wall, on the faded unit motto stenciled in bold black letters, "All the way, all the way." It was a promise, a creed we lived by. You never leave a soldier behind. You see the mission through, no matter the cost. My father had drilled that into me since I was a child. It was the foundation of my world. But today, my hero, my first commanding officer, had deserted me in the middle of the field. I didn't cry. The pain was too sharp, too profound for tears. It was a clean wound, cauterized by shock. Instead, it settled deep inside my chest, crystallizing into a solid, cold block of ice, heavy and sharp-edged. It pressed against my lungs, making it hard to breathe, freezing everything it touched. The silence that followed that phone call was deafening. I didn't move from the couch for what felt like an hour, just staring at the unit motto on the wall. All the way. The words mocked me. In that crushing quiet, my mind did what it always does when I'm hurt. It rewound the tape, searching for a reason, for a pattern. Because this wasn't an isolated incident. This wasn't a sudden betrayal. It was the culmination of a long, quiet campaign. This was just the day the war broke out into the open. My mind drifted back 13 years, to the summer I turned 16. My sweet 16. I'd just gotten back from a junior military leadership camp in the Blue Ridge Mountains. I was tan, covered in mosquito bites, and bursting with pride. I had earned the top cadet award. I stepped off the Greyhound bus in Fayetteville feeling 10 feet tall, clutching the small plaque in my duffel bag, rehearsing how I'd present it to my dad. I had imagined a small celebration, maybe a cake, a few balloons, something to mark the day. But when I walked through the front door, my home was quiet. No balloons, no cake. I found my father and Serafina in the dining room, halfway through a dinner of takeout pizza. They looked up, surprised to see me. Serafina, already perfecting her art of casual cruelty, put a hand to her mouth in mock surprise. "Oh, Nancy, I totally forgot. We thought you were still at camp." She didn't look sorry. She looked amused. My dad, ever the peacekeeper, just offered a weak smile. "It's all right. We'll celebrate tomorrow. We'll make up for it." But tomorrow never came. The next day, Serafina had a crisis with a friend, and my dad had to drive her to Charlotte. The day after that, it was something else. My 16th birthday vanished, erased from the family calendar. That night, I sat alone in my bedroom and cried silently into my pillow. My birthday dinner was a Hershey bar I'd bought at the bus station. As I ate the waxy chocolate in the dark, I wished myself a happy birthday. That was my first real lesson. My presents, my milestones, they were optional. They could be easily forgotten. The lessons kept coming. A few years later, I received my first re-enlistment bonus. It wasn't a fortune, but to a young specialist, it felt like one. I had it all planned out. The money was going straight into my old Ford pickup truck. A new transmission, better tires. That truck was my freedom, my one tangible piece of independence. But before I could even call the mechanic, my phone rang. It was Serafina, her voice thick with manufactured tears. She was in a panic, sobbing about an emergency. She had maxed out a credit card and the bill was due. "If Dad finds out, he'll be so disappointed in me, Nancy," she'd wailed. "He thinks I'm so responsible. Please, you have to help me." It was a perfect trap, and I walked right into it. The thought of my father being disappointed was something I couldn't bear. So, I did what the good daughter would do. I logged into my bank account and transferred the entire bonus to her. Every last cent. A week later, I was scrolling through social media, and there it was. A picture of Serafina, smiling, posing in a boutique mirror. On her arm was a brand new, painfully expensive designer handbag. The caption read, "Treating myself after a week of hard work. Girl boss, you deserve it." My blood ran cold. The hard work she was talking about was the hard work of manipulating her younger sister. I looked out the window at my rusting truck, the truck that still stalled at red lights, and I realized I wasn't her sister. I was her emotional ATM, a resource to be tapped whenever her wants outweighed her wallet. The erosion of my identity continued, piece by painful piece. I remember one Christmas I managed to get leave. It was a rare treat. After a long, exhausting flight from Germany, all I wanted to do was sleep for a week. I was jet-lagged, worn out, and emotionally drained. At the family gathering, I was quiet, sitting in a corner, just trying to absorb the feeling of being home. But Serafina saw an opportunity. I overheard her talking to my aunts and uncles in the kitchen, her voice dripping with false concern. "Nancy is just different now," she'd said, sighing dramatically. "The army has made her so hard. She doesn't really care about family stuff anymore." Later, when I tried to explain that I was just tired, my father pulled me aside. He didn't defend me. He didn't understand. He just repeated her script. "You should try to engage more, Nancy," he'd said gently. "Your sister is worried about you." He had already accepted her narrative. I was the cold, distant soldier, and Serafina was the warm, beating heart of the family, desperately trying to hold us all together. But the final, deepest cut came on the day of my promotion ceremony to sergeant. It was a huge milestone, a culmination of years of relentless effort. I stood on that parade ground, my uniform perfectly pressed, my back ramrod straight, and scanned the small crowd of families for my father's face. He wasn't there. I called home that night, my heart a lead weight in my stomach. He answered, his voice distracted. "Sorry I couldn't make it, warrior," he said. "Serafina had a really important presentation for a client. I needed to be here to help her prep." Then I heard Serafina's voice, muffled in the background. A stage whisper. "Dad, just tell her you're proud of her. It'll make her feel better." There was a pause. Then my father's voice came back on the line, suddenly warmer, as if a switch had been flipped. "Oh, and Nancy, I'm proud of you, son. Really proud." But the words were hollow. They meant nothing. They weren't his. They were a script, handed to him by the person who had always been the director of our family's play. I was just a supporting character, and my lines, my feelings, and even the praise I received were all written by someone else. As those cold memories from my past flooded back, a bitter thought settled deep in my heart. Was there ever a place where I didn't have to fight for a scrap of affection? Where I didn't have to prove my worth? And then, like a flicker of light in the darkness, my mind drifted away from the cold silence of Fort Bragg, away from my childhood home, to a warm, noisy backyard in Apex, North Carolina. to the first time Caleb took me home. I remember that day vividly. I was a nervous wreck. Meeting the parents was always a high-stakes mission. I'd spent an hour getting ready, choosing a crisp button-down shirt that I hoped struck the right balance between civilian appropriate and sergeant respectable. In the car on the way there, I mentally rehearsed my answers to the inevitable questions about my career, my deployments, my future ambitions. I was preparing for an inspection. I was preparing for judgment. But the moment Caleb's truck pulled into the driveway of their simple ranch-style house, I knew my preparations were for the wrong battle entirely. I stepped out of the truck and was hit by a wave of sensory information that instantly disarmed me. The air was thick with the rich, smoky smell of barbecue ribs. The unmistakable sound of Johnny Cash singing about a ring of fire drifted from a small Bluetooth speaker on the porch. And Caleb's dad, Marcus, a cheerful man with a kind face, was leaning over the back fence, laughing loudly with his neighbor about a lawnmower. Before I could even process it all, the screen door swung open and a woman bustled out, wiping her hands on her apron. This was Ilara, Caleb's mom. Her hands were still dusted with flour from the cornbread she was making. She took one look at me, broke into a huge grin, and before I could even extend a hand for a formal shake, she pulled me into a warm, enveloping hug. "Oh my lord, she's gorgeous!" Ilara exclaimed, squeezing me tight. She held me at arm's length, beaming. "Caleb, why have you been hiding her from us? Get in here, honey, before the mosquitoes carry you away." I was speechless. There was no inspection, no cautious sizing up, just acceptance. Instant, unconditional acceptance. I followed her into the house, feeling like a soldier who had stumbled out of a war zone and into a peaceful village. Later, I was sitting on the wooden porch swing in the backyard, a tall glass of condensation-beaded sweet tea in my hand. The sweet, syrupy liquid was a taste of the South I'd almost forgotten. The gentle creak of the swing was the only sound for a moment, a peaceful rhythm in the humid evening air. Ilara came and sat down beside me. I braced myself for the interrogation. Now it would come. The questions about my rank, my service record, my combat experience. But she didn't ask about any of that. She just looked at me with genuine motherly concern in her eyes and asked the simplest question in the world. "Honey," she said softly, "do you get to eat good food in there?" It was such a simple, basic question, a question about my comfort, my well-being. And it completely shattered my defenses. A lump formed in my throat, hot and tight. I had to blink back tears. For my entire life, my own father had only ever asked about my performance, my PT scores, my marksmanship qualifications, my promotion potential. He assessed me. No one in my family had ever, not once, asked me if I was eating well, if I was okay. In that moment, sitting on that porch swing, I finally understood the fundamental difference between being seen as an asset and being seen as a daughter. The evening continued to unfold with these small, quiet revelations. A man emerged from the side of the house, moving with a silent efficiency that I recognized instantly. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with the rough, calloused hands of a man who worked with wood. Caleb put his arm around me. "Nancy, this is my uncle, Jed. He's a former Marine." Jed just gave me a short, single nod. But his eyes held a deep, quiet understanding. He looked me over, not to judge my appearance or my posture, but to recognize me. It was the look one service member gives another, a look of shared experience, of unspoken respect. He held out his hand, and I shook it. His grip was firm, solid, like the oak he probably worked with. "Welcome home, Sergeant," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble. Just 4 words. But in those 4 words, he gave me everything my own father was in the process of taking away. He didn't call me Nancy. He addressed me by my rank, acknowledging the sacrifice and the work that it represented. He called me Sergeant, and he told me I was home. The respect and the belonging offered in a single, powerful sentence. This was the family that had embraced me. This was the foundation upon which Caleb and I were building our life. I thought back to the evening he proposed. We were out at Jordan Lake, the sun setting in brilliant strokes of orange and purple across the still water. There was no grand gesture, no getting down on one knee. That wasn't Caleb's way. He just took my hand, his grip as solid and reassuring as his uncle's. "Nancy," he said, his voice serious but kind. "I know you're a warrior, and you don't need anyone to protect you. But I want to be the one who stands guard over your peace. I want to be the place where you can finally put down your weapons and just rest. Will you marry me?" His promise wasn't about glory, or duty, or strategic value. It was about peace. It was about rest. He was offering me the one thing I had never had in my own family. He was offering me a home front. And I had said yes without a moment's hesitation. That promise from Caleb, the feeling of safety I found with his family, that was the new home front I needed. For the first time in a long time, I felt secure enough to plan a future. And so, I did. I dove headfirst into wedding planning. I picked the venue, a beautiful rustic barn in Pittsburgh. I sent out the invitations. I officially announced the date, June 15th, to my family. And that's when the incoming fire started. My sister Serafina began her psychological operation immediately. It started subtly, a series of phone calls that were like tiny needles dipped in poison, delivered with a syrupy sweet voice. The first call came a few days after she got the invitation. "Nance, honey, I just saw the venue online," she chirped. "A barn in Pittsburgh. How quaint." "It's cute, really. But do you think it has the right caliber for Dad's contacts? The generals, the politicians he knows? I'm just worried for you, that's all. I want your day to be perfect." Each word was a carefully aimed dart, designed to hit my deepest insecurities. She knew I felt the class difference between her polished Charlotte world and my own. A few days later, another needle. "Did you send an invite to the Thorns?" she asked, her voice oozing fake concern. "I just hope they don't feel out of place, amongst our family's friends. They seem like such simple people." I tried to brush it off, to tell myself she didn't mean it that way, but the poison was already working. She was making me doubt my choices, making me feel small. She was framing my happiness as a potential source of embarrassment for the family. Then came the main assault. She called me a week later, her voice breathless with feigned excitement. "Oh my God, Nancy, you are not going to believe this. You know how hard I've been working to break into the luxury market? Well, a major investor from New York, like a huge deal, has invited me to an exclusive private reception during High Point Market. This is it, Nancy. This is my chance to change my entire life." She was a brilliant liar. High Point Market is the largest home furnishings trade show in the world, a massive, prestigious event in North Carolina. By tying her fictional party to a real, high-status event, she gave her lie an instant cloak of credibility. She had built the perfect trap. That's great, Sarah," I said, a knot of suspicion tightening in my stomach. I was waiting for the other shoe to drop, and it did. "There's just one tiny problem," she said, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper. "It's on June 15th. I am so devastated I cried all morning, but this is the kind of opportunity that only comes once. I knew you would understand. For the family." There it was, that magic phrase. For the family. She had masterfully twisted her selfish ambition into a noble sacrifice, and in doing so, she was painting me into a corner. If I objected, I was the selfish one. I was the one not thinking of the family. I tried to push back, my voice shaking with a fury I could barely contain. "Serafina, you can't be serious. You can't ask me to be okay with this." And that's when the mask of the supportive sister fell away. Her voice turned cold, sharp, and utterly dismissive. It was her true voice. "Listen to me, little sister," she said, the words like shards of ice. "Your wedding is a party. It lasts for a few hours. My career is a lifetime. You're marrying a contractor, who's a very nice guy, I'm sure, but let's be realistic. This family needs someone who produces financial results, not someone who just parades around in a uniform." The insult was twofold and devastatingly effective. She hadn't just belittled Caleb and his profession, the profession of the man who built things with his own two hands. She had reduced my years of service, my sacrifices, my entire identity, to a meaningless parade, a cheap spectacle. I hung up, my hand trembling. I felt cornered, outmaneuvered. There was only one person left who could see through this, who could stop it. My father. I called him immediately, my heart pounding with a desperate, fading hope. I explained everything, the timing, the manipulation, the cruel words she'd said. I laid out the facts, hoping the logical mind of the colonel would see the clear tactical deception. But Alistair Watts was no longer a colonel. He was a captive, Seraphina's prisoner. "Seraphina is fighting in a tough world, Nancy," he said, his voice dripping with a paternal pride that was never, ever directed at me. "The business world. It doesn't have the pension and the government security that you have. She's out there on her own." "Dad, I'm on my own too," I pleaded, my voice cracking. "I need you. You promised me." His next words were the ones that finally broke me. He used my own strength as a weapon against me, turning my independence into a justification for his abandonment. "You're strong, Nancy. You can handle this. You've always been able to take care of yourself. Your sister. She needs me right now." And I finally understood my place in his world. In his eyes, I was a fortress, self-sufficient and battle-hardened, requiring no support. Seraphina was a vulnerable outpost, a forward operating base that needed constant reinforcement. He was deploying all his resources to protect her while leaving his other command to fend for itself. Because in his mind, the strong don't need a father. They only need to be strong for everyone else. Hanging up the phone with my father, I felt a familiar coldness seep back into my bones, the icy residue of defeat. But this time, it was different. It wasn't just sadness. It was the sharp, clean burn of anger. A cold, hard anger that clarified everything. And then, as if on cue, my phone buzzed. It was an email. The sender was Seraphina. The subject line read, "Important Family Update." She had CC'd the entire Watts clan. Every aunt, uncle, and distant cousin was on the list. My heart hammered against my ribs as I opened it. The text was written in her signature bubbly, sickeningly sweet style. "Dearest family," it began. "I am just over the moon to share some amazing news about a career opportunity that has come my way on June 15th. Unfortunately, as fate would have it, this incredible event conflicts with Nancy's wedding. I am heartbroken to miss my little sister's big day, but as you all know, sometimes we have to make difficult choices for the future of the family. Sending all my love." It wasn't an announcement, it was a victory lap, a calculated act of public humiliation. With a single email, she had painted herself as the martyr, the one making a noble sacrifice, while simultaneously branding me as the selfish child whose minor personal event stood in the way of the family's prosperity. She had seized control of the narrative, and in her story, I was the villain. That was it, the final straw, the point of no return. I didn't scream, I didn't throw my phone. I simply stood up, my movements stiff and robotic, and walked out of the common room. The air outside was thick and heavy with the promise of a summer storm, but I felt like I was the one about to break. I practically ran to my truck in the parking lot, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking. I threw myself into the driver's seat and slammed the door, the sound echoing in the sudden, confining silence. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt tight, constricted, as if a physical weight was pressing down on me. I needed a distraction, something, anything, to stop my mind from spinning out of control. My hands moved on their own, grabbing my phone, my thumb jabbing at the YouTube app. The algorithm, in its infinite and strange wisdom, offered up a video at the top of my feed. The thumbnail was a man in a decorated military uniform. The title read, "University of Texas at Austin 2014 Commencement Address, Admiral William H. McRaven." On instinct, I pressed play. Admiral McRaven's voice, steady and forged from decades of command, filled the small cab of my truck. "It is the great equalizer," he was saying. "If you want to change the world, don't be afraid of the circuses." I listened, half distracted, until one phrase cut through the noise in my head. "You cannot paddle the boat alone," he said, his voice ringing with authority. "Find someone to help you paddle." My eyes snapped into focus. I stared unseeing through the windshield at the endless rows of military vehicles. Find someone to help you paddle. All my life, Serafina's greatest weapon had been her ability to isolate me, to make me feel like I was rowing against the current completely on my own. The Admiral wasn't finished. If you want to change the world, he declared, don't ever, ever ring the bell. Don't give up, don't quit. It was the simplest, most fundamental rule of being a soldier. My father had quit on me. He had rung the bell. But what about me? I am a sergeant in the United States Army. I wasn't trained to surrender. I was trained to adapt, to overcome, and to fight back. A chilling, absolute clarity washed over me. The anger that had been a chaotic storm in my chest suddenly coalesced into a single, sharp point of purpose. This was no longer a family dispute. This was a tactical problem. This was an operation. My hands, no longer shaking, moved with precision. I picked up my phone. I didn't call my father. I didn't call Serafina. I called Caleb. He answered on the first ring. Hey, you, he said, his voice warm and steady. My love, I replied, and my own voice was so calm it scared me. I need you to assemble the unit, tonight, at your parents' house. We're having a strategy meeting. There was no hesitation on his end, just a simple, I'm on it. See you soon. I was no longer a heartbroken bride. I was a commander, planning a counteroffensive. I had found my people, the ones who would help me paddle. But before I drove to the Thorn house, there was one last thing I had to do. One final communication to the previous chain of command. I took a deep breath, found my father's number, and pressed call. This time, there was no pleading in my voice, no hurt. There was only steel. Dad, I said when he answered, my tone formal and precise. I'm calling to inform you, not to ask for permission. My wedding will proceed as planned on June 15th at 1400 hours at the barn at Valhalla. I would be honored to have you there in your capacity as the father of the bride. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. However, if you have a conflicting mission, I understand completely. I have already arranged for a contingency. I let the word contingency land, turning the replacement he had so casually suggested into my own strategic choice, my backup plan. I finished the call. I trust you'll make the right decision, Colonel. I hung up, leaving him in a silence of his own making. That was the moment I stopped being his soldier and started being my own commander. If you know what that moment feels like, hit the like button and type Commander in the comments below. Let me know I'm not alone. I put the truck in drive and headed for Apex. The quiet hum of the engine, a steady companion to the newfound purpose coursing through my veins. The planning phase was over. It was time to assemble the troops. When I walked through the door of the Thorns house, it felt like stepping into a command center that had been cleverly disguised as a cozy family home. The atmosphere wasn't somber or pitying. It was charged with a quiet, focused energy. The air smelled of comfort. Fried chicken, freshly baked cornbread, and Alara's famous potato salad were spread out on the dining table like rations for a long night ahead. It was a war room fueled by Southern hospitality. Caleb, Marcus, and Jed were already there, gathered in the living room. Their expressions were serious, their attention fixed on me as I entered. It wasn't the awkward tension of a family dealing with drama. It was the focused silence of a team waiting for their briefing. Caleb had even propped up a small whiteboard he'd brought home from his contracting office. I took my place in front of it, feeling more like a sergeant than I had all day. I didn't cry. I didn't break down. I delivered the report with the same clarity and precision I would use in a mission briefing. I laid out the sequence of events, the psychological tactics employed by the opposing force, my sister, and the complicity of my father. I pulled up Serafina's email on my phone and passed it around. I reported my father's words, his justification, his final dismissal of my worth. I presented the facts, unclouded by emotion. When I finished, a heavy silence settled over the room. It wasn't an awkward silence, it was a thoughtful one. Then Alara, who had been listening with a thunderous expression on her face, spoke first. Her usually gentle voice was hard as flint. That girl, she said, shaking her head slowly, her eyes flashing with a protective fire I'd never seen before. She's not just selfish, Marcus. She's cruel. Marcus, a practical man who built houses for a living and had no time for nonsense, simply nodded. He looked directly at me, his gaze steady and reassuring. He didn't ask me how I felt. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He asked the most powerful question I had ever heard. "All right," he said, his voice calm and decisive. "So what's the plan? What do you need us to do, Nancy? What do you need us to do?" The word hung in the air, a shield and a promise. Us. In that single moment, they had crossed the line from sympathetic bystanders to active allies. They had enlisted. My whole life, my own family had made me feel like I had to defend myself from them. This family, the one I had chosen, was standing up to defend me. The difference was so profound it almost brought me to my knees. My eyes then moved to the man who had been sitting silently in the armchair throughout my entire briefing. Jed. He hadn't said a word, but his gaze had never left my face. I took a deep breath, the kind you take before stepping into the unknown. This was the most critical part of the operation. "Uncle Jed," I said, my voice now softer, more formal. "I know this is a huge thing to ask. An unconventional request. But my father suggested I ask you. And honestly, I can't think of a man with more honor to do this. Would you be willing to walk me down the aisle?" The room fell completely silent. Jed didn't answer right away. He rose slowly from his chair, a tall, imposing figure, and walked over to stand directly in front of me. He looked me straight in the eye, and it was a look I knew well. It was the look of a senior NCO assessing a subordinate, not for weakness, but for resolve. It was a look from one warrior to another. When he finally spoke, his voice was a low, steady rumble that vibrated with absolute conviction. "Sergeant," he said, his eyes unwavering, "that is not a request. That is an order, and I will execute that order." A wave of emotion so powerful it buckled my knees washed over me. This man, a Marine, had just accepted a mission from an Army sergeant. He understood. He understood that this wasn't about a party or a ceremony. This was about honor. This was about not leaving a soldier behind. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The tension broke, replaced by a surge of proactive energy. It was like a machine roaring to life. Ilara immediately took charge of communications. "I'll handle the information control," she said, already reaching for her phone. "I'll call the cousins who got that email. I'll tell them the colonel might be delayed due to a sudden family matter. We'll control the narrative before Serafina can spin any more lies." Caleb pulled out a notepad. "I've got logistics. I'll call the venue, the caterer, the photographer. I'll make sure they know that Jed is the designated escort. No confusion, no surprises on game day." Marcus put a heavy, comforting hand on my shoulder. "Anything you need, you hear me?" he said simply. "Financially, physically, anything. You just say the word." I looked around the room at these incredible people who were rolling up their sleeves and preparing for battle on my behalf. The block of ice in my chest, the one my father's words had created, finally began to melt. I wasn't alone on a battlefield anymore. I wasn't an isolated fortress. I was a commander with her unit, and we were ready. The morning of June 15th dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect summer day North Carolina saves for its most important occasions. I was sitting in a chair in the bridal suite at the barn at Valhalla, a whirlwind of hairspray and makeup brushes swirling around me. I felt strangely calm, the way a soldier does in the quiet moments before an operation begins. My phone, lying on the vanity, buzzed twice. 2 messages from 2 different worlds. The first was from my father. "Good luck today. Report back after. Save me some cake." I stared at the words. It wasn't a blessing. It was a directive. Clinical, detached, as if I were a subordinate on a routine training exercise. Report back after. It was a demand for a debrief on a day that was supposed to be about love, not logistics. Then the second message came through. It was from Jed. "Alpha Unit, the uncle, en route to Rally Point, the bride's room. Ready to escort the CO. Over." A genuine smile touched my lips for the first time that morning. His message was filled with the gallows humor soldiers love, but beneath it was a profound respect. He called me his commanding officer. In that moment, the difference between the man who gave me life and the man who was giving me his loyalty had never been clearer. A few minutes later, there was a soft knock on the door. Jed entered, looking impossibly distinguished in a sharp navy suit. He wasn't a man of many words. He simply walked over and handed me a small, beautifully worn wooden box. I opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was an old brass compass, its surface burnished with age. "It was my father's," Jed said, his voice a low, warm rumble. "He was a sailor. He always said it never failed to point him home. Today, you're building a new home, Nancy. I hope this always helps you find your way." Tears pricked my eyes as I closed my hand around the compass. It felt heavy, solid, imbued with history. This wasn't just a gift. It was an inheritance, a passing of a legacy of honor from his father to him, and now to me. When I finally stood and took his arm, ready to walk down that aisle, the image was more powerful than I could have imagined. A sergeant of the U.S. Army, being escorted not by a deserting colonel, but by an unwavering Marine. In that moment, honor was officially transferred. The ceremony was beautiful. The reception that followed was a joyous blur of laughter, dancing, and heartfelt toasts at the barn at Valhalla. For a few hours, I allowed myself to forget the impending battle, to simply exist in the warmth and love of my new family. And then, the intelligence arrived. I saw my cousin, Orion, making his way through the crowd toward me. Orion was my mother's sister's son, a sharp guy who worked in event marketing. He looked flustered, his eyes wide. "Nancy, I need to talk to you. Privately." He pulled me aside near the old oak tree at the edge of the property and showed me his phone. "I had a gig in Charlotte today," he said, his voice low and urgent. On the way out of town, I got curious. I drove by the address Serafina sent in her email. He took a deep breath. "Nancy, there was no corporate event. There was no big investor. It was a cocktail party at her apartment, maybe 10 friends, tops. I saw them on her balcony." My blood ran cold. It was the confirmation I needed, but it still felt like a punch to the gut. "And that's not all," Orion said, his thumb swiping across the screen. "Look at this." He showed me a text exchange from 2 months ago, a conversation he'd had with Serafina. Her message, glowing on the screen, was undeniable proof of her malice. It read, "Just wait. I'm about to teach Little Miss Captain America a long overdue lesson about who really matters to Dad." I had my proof. The smoking gun. My resolve hardened into something unbreakable. The final act began an hour later. Colonel Alistair Watts finally made his grand entrance, striding into the reception as if he were the guest of honor, a perfectly wrapped gift tucked under his arm. He scanned the room, a politician working the crowd, until his eyes landed on me. He saw me standing next to Jed, laughing at something he'd said. The smile on my father's face vanished, replaced by a thunderous scowl. He marched over to us, his posture radiating indignation. He ignored me completely and aimed his fury directly at Jed. "Who gave you the authority to do this?" he hissed, his voice low and menacing. This was the moment. I stepped forward, positioning myself between them. "I did," I said, my voice as cold and clear as ice. Armed with Orion's intelligence, I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply presented the facts, laying out Serafina's entire pathetic, cruel deception for him to hear. "That's a lie," he sputtered, his face turning a blotchy red. "Serafina wouldn't." He cut himself off, turning his rage back to the easier target. He pointed a trembling finger at Jed. "You had no right. She is my daughter." The music had faded. The crowd had gone quiet. Everyone was watching. Jed stood his ground, his back straight, his gaze locked onto my father's. When he spoke, his voice wasn't loud, but it carried across the silent barn with the authority of a battlefield command. "With all due respect, Colonel," Jed began, his words deliberate and devastating. "Being a father is a lot like being a commanding officer. Your primary duty is to be there for your troops, to have their back, no matter what." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Nancy was your most important soldier today, Colonel. And at the most critical moment of her life, you went AWOL. The words soldier and AWOL struck my father with the force of a physical blow. They were his language, his code, his entire world, now turned against him. The anger drained from his face, replaced by a wave of raw, naked shame. The legend of the 82nd Airborne had just been publicly and dishonorably discharged from his duty as a father, and there was nothing left for him to do but retreat. After Jed's words fell like a judgment in the sudden silence of the barn, my father, Colonel Alistair Watts, simply froze. For a few long, agonizing seconds, he stood there, a statue of crumbling pride. His eyes darted around the room, not looking at anyone, least of all me. He looked like a man searching for an escape route from a battlefield he had just lost decisively. I have to go, he mumbled to no one in particular. Then he turned and walked, fled from the reception. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't make an excuse. He just left, a swift, graceless retreat. The beautifully wrapped gift he had brought sat abandoned on a table near the door, a monument to his failed mission. His exit wasn't the dignified departure of a colonel. It was the shameful flight of a caught deserter. A collective breath was released in the room. The silence was broken by the gentle scrape of a chair. It was Alara. She walked over to me, her face a mixture of fierce pride and deep compassion, and wrapped her arms around me in a tight hug. "You did the right thing, honey," she whispered into my hair. "You did the right thing." And as the band softly started playing again, I knew she was right. But victory felt strangely heavy. Caleb and I spent our honeymoon in a small secluded cabin nestled deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains, just outside of Asheville. The world there was quiet, painted in 1,000 shades of green. We spent our days hiking along winding trails, the air crisp and clean in our lungs, the only sounds the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a hawk. For the first time in months, the permanent tension in my shoulders began to ease. I had turned my phone off the moment we arrived, severing my connection to the old world and its toxic wars. I needed the silence. One evening, we sat before a crackling fire in the stone fireplace, the warmth pushing back the cool mountain night. Caleb was quiet for a long time, just watching the flames dance. Then he turned to me, his expression gentle. "Do you regret it?" he asked softly. "Any of it?" I thought about it for a long moment, watching the embers glow. "I don't regret telling the truth," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't regret standing up for myself. For us." I looked at him, needing him to understand the complex weight on my soul. "I'm just sad. I think I'm mourning someone, not the man who walked out of my wedding, but the hero I thought he was. I think that man died a long, long time ago, and I just didn't realize it until now." The sadness was a quiet ache, a hollow space where a hero used to be. It was the grief for a relationship that was, in truth, already gone. When the week was over, we drove back down the mountain, back to reality. As we pulled into our driveway, I finally turned my phone back on. It immediately lit up, buzzing and vibrating in my hand like an angry hornet. A long list of notifications scrolled across the screen. Dozens of missed calls. And a staggering number of new voicemails. All from my father. Later that night, after we had unpacked, I sat on our bed and, with Caleb sitting quietly beside me, I began to listen. It was like listening to the complete psychological breakdown of a man, recorded in 1-minute increments. The first voicemail was pure rage. "How dare you?" his voice boomed, the colonel in full fury. "How dare you humiliate me in public like that, Nancy, after everything I've done for you?" The second was laced with confusion and denial. "I spoke with Serafina," he said, his voice less certain. "She told me you and that cousin of yours concocted this whole story to hurt her. I knew it. I knew you were being dramatic." Then came the first crack in the armor. A later message, his voice strained. "She's not answering my calls now." Why would she do that if she's telling the truth? Orion isn't a liar. And then, the final message. Recorded late at night, his voice was barely a rasp, broken by a choked sob. I got her to talk, he whispered, and the sound was utterly defeated. She didn't deny it, Nancy. She laughed. She said you had it coming. He paused and I could hear him take a ragged breath. My God, what have I done? I took an oath, to my country, to my men. I never left anyone behind. But I left you. His voice cracked completely. I am so sorry, Nancy. I failed. As a colonel? And as your father? I failed. I listened to every single message, my face a blank mask. The validation I had craved for years was finally here, in these pathetic, broken recordings. But it brought no joy. Only a profound, weary sadness. I didn't reply that night. The next morning, Caleb and I talked it through. We talked about forgiveness and trust, and what a real relationship would have to look like going forward. He didn't tell me what to do, he just listened. Finally, I picked up my phone. I didn't call. I opened my messaging app and composed a single, clear, and final text. There were no comforting words. There was no easy forgiveness. There was only the hard truth. I have received your messages, I wrote. I'm going to need time, a lot of time. From now on, any relationship we have will be built on honesty. That means Serafina is no longer a part of my life. Period. And you will have to earn my trust back, one small piece at a time. Do not call me again, I will contact you. I hit send. The line had been drawn, not in sand, but in solid steel. My final text message to my father was a line drawn in steel, a clear and unambiguous order. And for the first time in his life, Colonel Alistair Watts followed an order from me. The silence that followed was absolute. No calls, no texts begging for forgiveness, no attempts to breach the boundary I had set. He respected the terms of engagement. 2 weeks went by. I had started to believe that this silence was his final answer, a quiet withdrawal. Then an email appeared in my inbox. My heart skipped a beat when I saw his name. I braced myself for another round of excuses or pleas, but it was neither. The subject line was simple, professional. Situation report. Inside there was no long, emotional paragraph. Just a single link to a news article from the Fayetteville Observer detailing a recent successful community project led by my old unit at Bragg. Below the link was a single sentence. Read this and thought of you, proud of you. That was it. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a request. It was just a report. A small, quiet act of acknowledgement sent from a distance, demanding nothing in return. I didn't reply, but I didn't delete the email either. I moved it to a new folder I created, a folder I simply named Dad. Months passed. The silence resumed, broken only by a handful of similar emails. A link to an article about new military technology. A short note about a veterans parade. Small, respectful dispatches from across the border I had drawn. Then, one afternoon, I got a text from Miller, one of the guys from my unit. He had been flying out of Charlotte Douglas International Airport on his way home for leave. The text contained a single, slightly blurry photo and a short message. Sarge, you are not gonna believe who's serving coffee here. I zoomed in on the picture, and there he was, my father. Not in a crisp suit or a decorated uniform, but in the simple blue polo shirt of a USO volunteer. He was standing behind a counter, pouring a cup of coffee for a young soldier who couldn't have been more than 19. He looked older, the lines on his face deeper. But there was a quietness in his expression, a lack of the familiar authoritative tension. He wasn't commanding. He was serving. I stared at that photo for a long, long time. This wasn't for show. There were no cameras there, besides the random cell phone of one of my soldiers. He wasn't doing this to impress me. He was doing it to understand me. He was quietly, humbly, trying to learn the language of my world from the ground up. It was I who broke the silence. A few weeks later, I sent him a text. I'll be in Fayetteville this weekend. Meet me at the Waffle House on Bragg Boulevard. Saturday, 0700. The choice of location was deliberate. A Waffle House is neutral territory. It's not my world, and it's certainly not his. It's just a place where people from all walks of life come to eat. No pretense, no ceremony. He was there 15 minutes early, sitting in a booth by the window, a cup of coffee already in his hands. Our breakfast was awkward. The air was thick with unspoken words. But for the first time in my life, he didn't fill the silence with stories about himself or Serafina. He asked about Caleb. He asked about my work. He even asked about the young soldier in the photo Miller had sent me, and he listened, truly listened, to my answer. He didn't offer advice. He didn't judge. He just absorbed what I was saying. When the check came, he paid. As I stood up to leave, all he said was, "Thank you for this, Nancy. Thank you for the opportunity." The real turning point, the moment the ground truly shifted beneath our feet, came on Thanksgiving. He had tentatively invited Caleb and me to his house, an invitation I politely declined. The memory of that home was still too sharp. Instead, I extended a counteroffer. I invited him to have Thanksgiving dinner with the Thorns. It was a test. I was bringing him into my new territory, my new family. He accepted. He showed up on time, with a pumpkin pie from a local bakery in hand, looking like a soldier on his first day in a new unit. He was quiet, respectful, and observant. He watched the easy way Marcus and Jed moved around the kitchen, the way Alara hugged everyone who walked through the door. After dinner, as we all sat in the living room, full and content, he did something I never would have predicted. He stood up holding his half-empty glass of sweet tea. The room fell quiet. "I'd just like to say something," he began, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't identify. He didn't look at me, he looked directly at Jed. "I want to thank Jed," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "for doing what a Marine always does, for completing the mission." He finally turned his gaze to me, his eyes shining with unshed tears. He completed the mission I abandoned. He was a better father to my daughter on her wedding day than I was. He raised his glass. To Jed. The admission, made publicly, in front of the family who had taken me in, was the greatest act of surrender I had ever witnessed. It was a full, unconditional apology, not in words, but in a public act of humility and honor. It was the beginning of a long, slow reconstruction. 1 year later. The scene is the backyard of the small house Caleb and I bought on a quiet, tree-lined street in a suburb just outside Raleigh. The air is warm, thick with the scent of freshly cut grass and sizzling hamburgers on the grill. The sound of laughter mixes with the classic rock playing softly from a portable speaker. We're hosting a barbecue for our first wedding anniversary. It's a perfect day. The Thorne family is here in full force. Jed is showing my cousin Orion a tricky woodworking joint on the new deck Caleb just finished. Alara is deep in conversation with one of our neighbors, and over by the grill, a sight I never would have thought possible a year ago. My father, Alistair Watts, stands shoulder to shoulder with Marcus Thorne. They're wearing matching ridiculous aprons that say Grill Sergeant and are locked in a spirited but friendly debate about whether the Carolina Panthers have any real shot at the Super Bowl this year. My father looks relaxed. The stiff, authoritative bearing of the colonel has been replaced by the easy posture of a grandfather-in-waiting. He's laughing, actually laughing, a real laugh that reaches his eyes. He's no longer an invading force, he's simply part of the landscape. In a quiet moment, as I refill a pitcher of lemonade in the kitchen, Alara comes up beside me. She places a gentle hand on my arm. "It's a beautiful party, honey," she says softly. Then her voice drops a little. "I haven't heard you mention your sister. Is she doing okay?" I take a deep breath and pour the lemonade, the ice cubes clinking against the glass. "She moved to Florida," I say, my voice even. After Dad finally cut off her financial support, she called me. One last time, screamed at me for a solid 10 minutes, told me I had ruined the family. I look out the window at the happy scene in my backyard, at this beautiful, chaotic, loving group of people. I shrug, a small, simple movement of acceptance. You know, I say, turning back to Alara, maybe she was right. I did ruin that family. The old, toxic, broken one. A small smile touches my lips, so that a new one, a healthier one, could be built in its place. There's no anger in my voice anymore, no bitterness, just a quiet acknowledgement of the truth. Some wounds don't fully heal, they just become scars you learn to live with. And some relationships are better left in the past, like scorched earth you choose not to rebuild on. Later, I walk back inside to grab a bottle of ketchup and find my father standing alone in our living room. He's looking at the gallery wall where we've hung our wedding photos. His eyes are fixed on one picture in particular, the exact moment Jed placed my hand in Caleb's at the altar. He doesn't say anything, but I can see a profound and complicated sadness in his gaze, a grief for a moment he had forfeited, a moment he could never get back. I walk up quietly and place a hand on his shoulder. He flinches slightly, then relaxes into the touch. "It's okay, Dad," I say softly. "Everyone was exactly where they were supposed to be that day." He just nods, unable to speak. I reach into the pocket of my jeans and pull out the small, heavy brass compass Jed gave me. I hold it in the palm of my hand. "He told me this would always point the way home," I say, closing my fingers around it. I look up and meet his eyes. And it did. I found it. His eyes well up, and for the first time, he doesn't try to hide it. He just gives me a shaky, grateful smile. As dust settles, we all gather around the fire pit Caleb built in the center of the yard. The kids are gleefully roasting marshmallows for s'mores, their faces lit by the warm, flickering glow. I'm leaning against Caleb, his arm wrapped securely around me, my head resting on his shoulder. It is a moment of perfect peace. My father clears his throat, and all eyes turn to him. He's looking around the circle, from me, to Caleb, to the Thorns, to Jed, to this new blended family gathered around the fire. When I was in the service, he says, his voice low and thoughtful, we had a creed, a soldier's creed. Part of it was a promise. I will never leave a fallen comrade. He stares into the flames, the fire reflecting in his glasses. I broke that oath as a father. I left my comrade behind. He takes a deep breath, the confession hanging in the cool night air. But I'm learning to live by a new oath now, he says, finally looking up at me, his gaze steady and clear. An oath to just be present, to show up. I look at him, this man who is no longer my hero, but something more real, more fragile, and perhaps more valuable. A father who is trying. I look at Caleb, my rock and my home front. I look at Jed, the quiet embodiment of honor. At the Thorns, who taught me the meaning of unconditional love. I, Sergeant Nancy Watts of the United States Army, had finally found my unit. And this unit, would never be broken. Thank you for following my journey to this new home front. It took a long time, but I learned that family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who show up and choose to fight alongside you. It's the unit you build yourself. I'd be honored to hear who is in your unit. In the comments, tell me about one person who has been your rock, your chosen family. If this story of rebuilding honor resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe. We have many more journeys like this to share. Until next time, take care of your unit.